We acknowledge and pay our respects to the traditional custodians of this land, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and their elders past and present. I'd like to advise everyone that the audio of this meeting is being live streamed to YouTube. I request everyone to please turn off your mobile phones. I remind you that audio recording of the meeting proceedings and photography within the chamber is prohibited unless prior approval has been granted, and councillors and city officers are reminded to disclose any declarations of financial interests and interests affecting impartiality, and are requested to activate their microphones when addressing the meeting. So, with that, welcome. Item 1 is the declaration of opening, and I declare this meeting open at 3 minutes past 6 p.m. Items for council. Agenda items 2, 3, 6, 7, 8.1, 8.2, 9, 11, 13 and 14 will be dealt with at the ordinary council meeting to be held 25 October 2022. Item 4 is attendance. Item 4.1 is apologies, and we haven't received any apologies for this evening. Item 4.2 is approved leaves of absence, of which there are nil this evening. That brings us to item 5, which is declarations of interest. I've received 2, they're both from me. So Mayor Greg Milner, that's me. I'm declaring an impartiality interest in item 10.0.1 as my family are members of the Manning Community Toy Library. And I've also declared an impartiality interest in item 10.1.2 as a number of the nominees for that item are personally known to me. Councillors, does anyone else have any declarations of interest that they wish to make this evening? Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I also have a impartiality interest on the 10.1.2 item, as some of the candidates are known to me.
Thank you very much. Councillors, any other declarations of interest this evening? No. Okay. In that case, we're moving on to item 8, which is presentations. Item 8.3 is deputations, and this evening we have 2 speakers who will have up to 10 minutes each to address council. So I'd like to invite Tinashe Kamangira, I hope I've pronounced your name correctly, of Como, who is speaking against the officer recommendation at 10.3.1, and welcome to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
We can, yes.
Okay, cool. Thanks for having me. I'll be really brief. So I'm just speaking against the proposal for 1112 Lockhart Street. It's really simple. It's about rules. I'm not opposed to development. 3 years ago, I went to the planning division of the City of South Perth as I was looking to buy a property and subdivide it. The property was on Thelma Street. We were going to put 2 properties next to each other on a 1/4 acre block. The City of South Perth said I couldn't do it. I had to battle axe the properties because it was against the rules. When comments for this submission were requested within 14 days, I asked for more time. I was told I couldn't get more time because it was against the rules. When we purchased our property on the south side of this development, we looked up the rules. The rules said you could have 4 stories. What's being proposed here is really simple. They're asking to break the rules. 4 stories are 4 stories. Not 5, like they would have you believe in this fancy marketing document. An 80 km speed limit is not a 100 km speed limit. You wouldn't let me pay my council rates 25% short. If you let them break the rules here, what will they do next time? It'll become 6 stories because you've approved 5. Maybe because we live on the south side of Canning Highway, the officers think it's okay for a big developer to break the rules. When it comes to the city of South Perth, the rules apply to me. It raises questions about integrity. Sadly, we live in a world where too many people can break the rules. I thought I left that in Zimbabwe 20 years ago. We see this in other countries in Europe at the moment. Would you let them break the rules if this development was on Gladstone Street, Milson Street, or on Brandon Street? The conclusion in the report says the development still achieves a high level of compliance with planning. Rules are rules. The maximum building height shall be in accordance with Figure 2, Canning Bridge Activity Centre Plan land use. Maximum building height of 4 stories and 16 meters. Thank you. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you for your deputation. Councillors, does anyone... Oh, just stay there for the moment, please, Mr Kamangira. Councillors, does anyone have any questions? No. Thank you very much for your deputation.
And thank you for taking the time to listen to me.
I'd now like to invite Ms Tracy Destry of Manning, who is speaking against the notice of motion recommendation at item 12.2. Welcome, Ms Destry.
Thank you. Good evening, councillors, Mayor, CEO and administration. I speak against motion at 12.2, the notice of motion regarding petition policy. I have been here before and brought to your attention what I think is a very important role of council under the Local Government Act 2.10c. It is the role of a councillor to facilitate communication between the community and the council. Our expectations, along with council's expectations, is that is positive, constructive, sometimes difficult. Sometimes it takes a thick skin, but it is the role. In looking at the motion on notice, I am a bit concerned in some of the language that has been used. I think it is very directive and I fear it is bordering on directing operations, given that it is also being quite clear on what should be contained in the policy. There are other parts where it says any additional information as required to be included as the CEO sees fit. The CEO does not make decisions about policy. The CEO drafts policy for council's decision. I'm not sure that those that wording is consistent with those directions. If we look at recent activities in the city, the Audit, Risk and Governance Committee met on the 13th of September, and this was these deliberations and minutes were subsequently approved on the 27th of September at the OCM. Councillor Choi, I note that you are a member of both of these committees. This meeting reviewed the city's policies. It looked at drafts, it looked at changes. At no time in that document does it mention or refer to the need for a petition policy. Given the policy related it does now appear then this the need for a policy or apparent need for a policy clearly relates to the petition regarding the RAF that was submitted to council in September, and that council resolved not to receive that petition and not to refer it to the relevant director for consideration. A decision, as we know, is contrary to the standing orders. We can only assume that the NOM therefore directly relates to the RAF petition. That is an assumption I'm making, but I think the evidence is also supportive of that. This NOM actually, to me, sets a precedent across local government in WA. I stand to be corrected, but there does not appear to be a similar one across WA. It has already attracted considerable adverse media attention, and I would attest that subsequently a reputational risk to this council and to the city and to the people in it. As with any policy development, it is good practice to look at what else there's been done in WA. I did not take very long to do this, but a review of the web found that Walga, in its August 2019 prospective electors meeting webinar, was asked the question about what are the rules in relation to community petitions. The answer was the rules for community petitions presented to council are usually included in the local government meeting procedures or standing orders local law, as we have in South Perth. Local laws may set out the form that the petition is presented in, the method for presenting the petition, and the way that council can deal with that petition. For example, the local law may provide several options, including that the petition be received and noted, or that the petition be received and referred for consideration by a committee. As we know, that didn't happen in September. Usually council will receive a petition and, depending on the subject matter, may also refer the matter to the administration and request a report to be prepared. And I'm thankful the administration have taken on that responsibility now. As we know, these expectations were not met by council at the last meeting. If we look at other policies, and I've looked at the City of Vincent, Melville, Victoria Park, Kalamunda and Belmont, none of them have a petitions policy. All of them have details in their standing orders or meeting procedures, and some of them have additional guidelines to help explain the use of the form, which, as we do, they have a template for. If we look at the City of Vincent, under its petitions, it also, importantly, and I think would be very helpful, says what council can do when it receives a petition. This is in its rules. Only motions that are in order are that the petitions be received and a report be prepared, be received and referred to a committee for consideration and report, or be received and be dealt with by council. Perhaps council can consider in its next review of the standing orders that something so specific could be added. The City of Melville has a very, I think, useful guideline that would be, I think, helpful to review. And those guidelines address how to submit a petition, what happens with my petition, which I think is a gap that we have, and the privacy and confidentiality issues related to it, so how it is dealt with. The City of Belmont have a fact sheet. Interestingly, if I can quote from that fact sheet, it also states that petitions be expressed in reasonable terms, be respectful and temperate in language, and not contain language disrespectful of council. It sounds very familiar to the to some of the text that's in the NOM, although I would note that decorous has been omitted. Finally, I would say that the NOM could be considered, as I've said before, as directing operations by specifying the content of a policy and not the council's expectations. I do have experience, as you may know, in council, and I certainly have considerable experience in drafting policies. It is important that we recognise the administration's role and expertise in certainly drafting documents for council's consideration, and we not direct them to do so. It puts, I think, council in a precarious position, and I feel it is reflected in the officer's alternate motion, and that the alternate motion is very brief. It does accept, however, that a policy will be drafted, and I think this should be reconsidered because I do believe a guideline would be sufficient. If we look at the examples I've provided, and I'm sure there are many more, these are simply documents that are on the website. They're a part of operations advice to the community and could be drafted very quickly without the need to come back for council decision. I again remind you as a local government councillor, The recent events have really, I think, soured some of the relationship the community has with the council. Your role is to facilitate communication. That means answering phone calls, returning emails, reaching out to members of the community, going to representative groups of the community and seeking their input and asking their advice on what they feel of decisions that are before council. I'm afraid I don't see a lot of evidence of that in South Perth, and I'm hopeful that that could improve. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your deputation. Councillors, do we have any questions for Mr Stree this evening? No. Thank you very much for your deputation.
Thank you.
That brings us to item 10 on the agenda, which is the draft October reports. And I now hand you over to the Chief Executive Officer, Mr Mike Bradford, to take you through the balance of the draft October reports.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.0.1, proposed licence agreement for Manning Community Toy Library Incorporated, located at the Manning Community Centre. This item has been brought back before Council after having been considered at the ordinary Council meeting held in August of 2022, where the Officer and Property Committee recommendation was not supported. Following an alternative motion, Council resolved for the item to be reconsidered after a councillor briefing session was held to review the City's advice policy and documents in relation to leases and licences. This briefing was held on the 11th of October this year. This report seeks Council to reconsider approval for the City to enter into a new licence agreement with the Manning Community Toy Library Incorporated for its continued use of a portion of the Manning Community Centre located at Lot 803 on Deposited Plan 69206 to Kenichi Street, Crescent Manning, for a 5-year term with an option of renewal for a further 5-year term.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, do we have any questions for the administration this evening, bearing in mind that there is a confidential attachment? Councillor Sullivan?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And I know there was a workshop on this item. I do apologise for not attending, as I was attending an 80th birthday celebration for a close family member. However, with regards to this licence, could you please outline, or the administration outline, what has changed in this new recommendation from the original one and why those changes were made?
Mr Adams, can you help us there?
Thank you for the question. In essence, we've taken on board some of the feedback from elected members regarding the wording that resulted in confusion amongst some councillors as to whether this should be a lease or a licence. We did hold a workshop for elected members that clarified some of the issues around leases and licences. And during that discussion, the administration undertook to try and use wording that clearly distinguished between the granting of leases and licences. At that briefing, it was also confirmed that the CEO has the authority to grant licences, and therefore we removed recommendation 2, which was to authorise the Mayor and the CEO to sign the document. The main changes we've made to recommendation 1 are to use the term licence fee instead of rent and remove the reference to outgoings.
Thank you, Mr Adams. Councillors, Councillor Navard. Not at a council agenda briefing, you can't, but you can certainly ask a question.
Actually, thank the city staff.
Well, I'm sure that's appreciated. Councillors, any further questions for the administration? Councillor Cridland.
Does the CEO have an estimate of how much money was spent on legal fees and consultants and staff hours in carrying out the briefings and advices and other advices on the difference between a lease and a licence in respect of a toy library that has a licence fee of $1 a year?
Mr Bradford, shall I send that your way, or?
Ms Tucker might have the answer. I was going to say I don't have that information to hand.
It's in the vicinity probably of around $10,000. We've had 2 sets of legal advice, plus there's a number of different staff hours that have been put on that, but most of that cost would be the legal advice the city's received.
Thank you. Any further questions on this item, councillors? Councillor Choi.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Is it not true that that workshop, the principles that were required from that workshop were found useful by both councillors that attended and also the CEO and other administration, and that the principles the principles learned and applied from that workshop will apply to all other leases and licences that are brought before council, not just to that one toy library licence? Thank you.
I'm not sure I should direct that to. Ms Stucker, is that a question that's capable of being answered?
Well, the correct form of the instrument was always a licence, so there's never any question around that. It's always useful to get additional information. Additional information can always be useful, and we will make use of that, yes.
Thank you. Any further questions on this item, councillors? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.1.1, City of South Perth Arts Advisory Group 2021-22 Annual Report. This report presents the Arts Advisory Group Annual Report for 2021-22.
Thank you. Councillors, any questions on this item? No. Oh, Councillor Navard.
Just noticed a typo that was on page 8 relating to the value of an artwork. I think it's registered as $898 million, so it's obviously the dots are in the wrong spot.
Thank you. That's on page 8 of the agenda, is it?
Yes, I think that's what it is.
Thank you very much. Any questions on item 10.1.1, councillors? No. If we can move on to the next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.1.2, City of South Perth Volunteer of the Year Awards Assessment and Recommendations for 2022. This report seeks council approval of the eligible nominations submitted for the City of South Perth Volunteer of the Year Awards program, and I note there is a confidential attachment for this item.
Any questions? Councillor Cridland.
No, it's not a question. I simply should make a declaration that some of the nominees are known to me, so it's an impartiality disclosure.
Thank you, Councillor Cridland. Councillors, Councillor Manolis.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. I also wish to make a impartiality declaration, as some of the applicants are known to me as well.
Thank you, Councillor Manolis. Councillors, any questions for the administration on this item? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.3.1, proposed 7 by 4 and 5 storey grouped dwellings, lot 229 at numbers 112 Lockhart Street and 11 McDougall Street, Como. This report considers an application for development approval for 7 group dwellings, 4 4-storey and 3 5-storey at lot 229, 112 Lockhart and 11 McDougall Street, Como. The item is referred to council as the building height exceeds 9 metres and therefore falls outside the delegation to officers. The building height of the proposed development is considered to satisfy the maximum height requirements prescribed by the Canning Bridge Activity Centre Plan. For the reasons outlined in the report, it is recommended that the application be approved, subject to the recommended conditions.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, any questions for the administration? Councillor Saladin.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I'm happy for this question to be taken on notice. In regards to the car bays required under the ACP, on this development, how many are required and how many have been provided?
Ms Mullen, can I send that your way?
Yes, thank you, through the chair. I will take that on notice to give it an accurate response. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions on this item? Councillor Russell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Who's responsible for the construction and upkeep cost of the footpath which is on McDougall Street Council Verge that services each dwelling directly?
Ms Mullen.
Thank you, through the chair. That would initially be the cost, the construction cost would be the developer, and then after that point it would come to the city.
It would come to the city? Okay, thank you. How is it legally bound then that the construction cost will be to the developer? Is it because it's purely because it's on the site, on the plans?
Ms Mullen.
Thank you, through the chair. Because it forms part of the development and services the development, that's why it would be the developer's cost.
Okay, thank you. I've got several questions actually. So I note that the bin location is in the garage, that's on the ground floor, and that the city has made it conditional that the bins are to be collected on the McDougall Street. So as a consequence, that would mean that for dwellings 2 to 6, the occupier needs to collect the bin, take it along the driveway onto Lockhart, and then onto the footpath around the corner onto McDougall, possibly in their dressing gown and Ugg boots. So how reasonable is that as a design feature?
Ms Mullen.
Thank you, through the chair. It is reasonable because the city wanted to retain the verge tree that would have been lost had the city agreed to the original location for bin collection, which was actually on the adjacent street. I think there's also an on-street parking bay as well, if I'm not mistaken. But certainly a verge tree would have been lost, and it was felt that the retention of that outweighed the short distance that residents would have to walk to bring their bins out onto the street. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm wondering why a landscape plan hasn't been provided as part of the DA.
Ms Mullen.
Thank you, the chair. It's not unusual for a landscaping plan to be conditioned and not be provided. I think with the amount of landscaping that's proposed in this development, it's acceptable for that to be submitted post approval.
Okay, thank you. On the site plan, there are 2 trees on the western side of the site. They've got coordinates C3 and D6. However, these have been excluded from the arborist report. Is there any reason why those 2 trees have been excluded?
Ms Mullen.
Thank you, the chair. There isn't, but what I will do is I will provide further information on notice with that particular point and to provide you with accurate response.
Okay, thank you. Just 2 more. My reading of the Canning Bridge Activity Centre plan is that this site is not subject for bonus height provisions. Is that correct?
Ms Mullen.
Thank you, through the chair. The height provisions are identified within the Canning Bridge Activity Centre plan as being 16 metres in height and indicative 4 storeys.
Oh, so they are applicable to this site? So I didn't understand that.
Through the chair. So there is a height indicated for this site, which is 16 metres in total.
Yeah, so but I mean the bonus height provisions which are in the plan itself, are they applicable to this site?
Through the chair, there are no bonus height provisions within this area.
Okay, thank you. Last question. So under Town Planning Schemes 6, 7.8, discretion to permit variations from the scheme provisions, it states that the power of discretion shall not be exercised by local government with respect to building heights, limits referred to in clause 6.1a. So when I view 6.1a, then under 6.1a10, building height restrictions in centre zones, subclause B, it states, for development in Canning Bridge Activity Centre, the building height limits are as prescribed in the plan. Hence, when I look at this, there seems to be a connection between the Town Planning Scheme 6 with respect to non-discretion in building heights and the heights within the plan. So could the city then please clarify the position when they state in the officer's report that under building height, it is also noted that as height requirements are contained within the plan and not the scheme, discretion may not be applied on height. It just seems to be counter to what was within the scheme.
Ms Mullen.
Thank you, through the chair. The officer's report is correct. There is discretion because this is the activity centre plan and not identified explicitly within the scheme. Thank you.
Councillors, any further questions for the administration on this item this evening? Councillor Navard.
I was just kind of puzzled about the noise, the noise level where there was moves taken to insulate against noise, but then the heights was so great that I thought that was quite strange that they would then seek to increase the height, because it was my understanding that noise levels are exaggerated by height. And so I was just puzzled about that kind of what seemed to be 2 things in conflict with each other.
Sorry, Councillor Navard, I wasn't sure what the question actually was there.
Okay.
Could you
It's to do
restate
with
that?
yes, I was wondering if I could have an explanation about the fact that the buildings are insulated quite specifically for noise because they are near to Canning Highway and the interchange for the rail. But at the same time, the townhouses have chosen to be 4 and 5 stories high, which I thought was in some ways quite curious, that they were seeking height and yet that would exaggerate the noise. So that's why I was wanting to ask a question about it.
So just for clarity, what is the question that you're asking to Ms Mullen?
Question is asking about the unusual arrangement with the insulation for noise, but building a construction that in fact increases the levels of noise.
Ms Mullen?
Thank you through the chair. So the condition that Councillor Navard is referring to is condition 4, which requires an acoustic report to be provided demonstrating the development will meet noise targets set out in State Planning Policy 5.4 road and rail noise. And then condition 5 states that any recommendations of the acoustic report required under condition 4 shall be implemented to the satisfaction of the city. So there are certain requirements within that state planning policy in relation to development within certain proximity of noise generating roads, rail, whatever. This development falls within that proximity area and therefore requires that condition. So the acoustic report may or may not require additional acoustic treatments to the properties, but we will find that from the acoustic report. Thank you.
Any further questions on this item? Councillor Russell, this will be your 10th question, so I'm going to allow it, but maybe this can be the last one.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just coming back to the bin collection, I understand these properties will have an address which is McDougall Street. Yeah, so is it policy, or is there any reason? Sorry, is there policy that bins are to be collected at the street address?
Ms Mullen?
Thank you through the chair. No, bin collection isn't related to the street address. Thank you.
Any further questions on this item, councillors? No. Oh, sorry, Councillor Cridland.
Question is to Ms Mullen. I'm sorry, I am struggling. Can you please just point me to where the discretion, where I would find the discretion to exceed the 16 metres and the 4 stories height limit for the H4 zone?
Ms Mullen?
And I'm happy if you email me later, but I'd like to know where it is, that's all.
Thank you through the chair. I'll take that on notice. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cridland, your light's still on there? No. Any further questions on this item for the administration, councillors? No. Thank you. And just before we move on, just a gentle reminder to try and keep questions short and succinct and try to avoid making statements that are best left for next week. So next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.4.1, listing of payments for September 2022. This report presents to Council a list of accounts paid under delegated authority between 1 and 30 September for information.
Any questions for the administration on this item, councillors? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.4.2, monthly financial statements for September 2022. This month, the monthly financial statements are provided within attachments A through I, with a high-level analysis contained in the comments for the report.
Any questions on this item, councillors? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.4.3, elected member superannuation. This report responds to Walga's request for local governments to provide feedback on implementing superannuation for elected members. Importantly, the officer's report does not make a conclusion, but leaves that to council to decide whether to support or not support the proposal.
Any questions for the administration? Councillor Saladin.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So if the new local government reforms said that as a Band 2 council we had to pay superannuation, would it be possible for this council to vote in order that the total package remained the same?
Ms Tucker, should I send that your way?
Under policy, council have decided to receive the maximum meeting allowance fees, and so to keep the same package, if superannuation was to be paid, there is an opportunity to reduce the meeting fee allowance if council decided.
Thank you.
Any further questions, councillors, on this item? No. In that case, that wraps up item 10. We now move on to item 12, which is motions of which previous notice has been given. Item 12.1 is a notice of motion from Councillor Carl Sullivan entitled Waste Plan Update. Councillors, do we have any questions for the administration on this notice of motion? No. In that case, we'll move on to item 12.2, which is a notice of motion from Councillor Mary Choi entitled Policy and Fact Sheet for Petitions. Councillors, do we have any questions for the administration on this notice of motion? Councillor Sullivan.
Yes, I had some questions for the administration. Do we know if the current petition would be rejected under this motion, if it was passed?
Mr. Adams, should I send that your way, or Mr. Bradford?
Kaz, can you confirm what do you mean by current petition?
It's the largest petition we received, the 2,000 over 2,000.
You're referring
signatures.
to the RAF?
Yeah, the RAF.
petition.
Yeah.
Okay. There's no objective test that I'm aware of for disrespectful or offensive language, so that would be a judgment that would have to be made by the CEO taking advice before considering that under the proposed policy. With respect to the RAF petition, notwithstanding that there isn't any explicit requirements in place, we did consider whether there was any inoffensive or disrespectful language and considered it to be appropriate.
Thank you, Mr. Bradford. Just a follow-up question. So you did kind of half answer, but I just want it confirmed. So whom would decide whether or not the petitions are respectful, decorous, and temperate under this motion?
Well, so the policy would require a decision to be made to put it on the agenda for council. That decision would ultimately be made by the CEO.
Thank you. And I understand there would be some work to bring this motion to fruition if it was passed. And do we have an approximate cost that would entail in terms of the proposed research, staff time and consultation with external agencies?
Mr. Adams.
Yeah, well, with regard to cost, it's probably difficult to put a number on it because it's not quite as simple as just putting a few words on a piece of paper. We'd probably be looking at drawing on clauses used in other local government standing orders, and would need to ensure that whatever we put forward for council consideration did not contravene the Local Government Act, the regulations or our own local law, or conflict with other policies that we have in place. We'd also want to ensure that the wording was clear and that the policy and fact sheet could be easily understood by the community rather than potentially creating more confusion. So we'd also need to be careful that whatever we put forward doesn't impinge on people's rights to publicly express an opinion. So there would be a bit of time spent doing that. That would be done within our existing staff allocation, and I guess trying to get all of that done with competing priorities when the deadline for November reports is 2nd of November is our internal deadline. That's more of the issue than the cost. So if we were going to try and do it within a much shorter time frame, then we probably would include some costs that are outside of our budget. But if we did it in a more appropriate time frame, then it would just be done within our existing budget allocations.
Okay, so you're suggesting if we gave it a little bit more time, the costs would still be material, but you'd be able to get on with those important things that administrations do first and then get to this.
I guess I'm just saying that we'd be able to absorb it into the existing workload with the existing staff allocation rather than having to, pay overtime or do things in a much shorter time frame.
Thank you. Councillors, any further questions? Councillor Choi.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Probably just a question for the CEO, if I may please. Just in relation to the deputation that was made earlier on this motion, just clarifying that did I not request upon submission of my notice of motion that in line with Standing Orders 5.34C, that if there were any compliance issues or otherwise detected with the intent or wording of my motion, that the relevant officer please let me know and or
Councillor
wordsmith
Choi,
where
it's
necessary to bring it into due form prior to the agenda being published.
Your question has to relate to an item on the agenda. There is an opportunity for elected members to ask questions without notice next week, but the question does have to relate to the actual item that's on the agenda tonight.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This is about my motion.
Ms Tucker?
Can you ask the question again, please, Councillor Choi?
Thank you, Ms Tucker, through the Chair. Yes, just in relation to this notice of motion, I'm just clarifying, asking a question following the deputation that was made earlier on this. Did I not request upon submission of my notice of motion that in line with Standing Orders 5.34C, that if there were any compliance issues or otherwise detected with the intent or wording of the motion, that the relevant officer please let me know and or wordsmith where necessary to bring it into due form prior to the agenda being published. Is that correct?
So am I sending that to Ms Tucker or Mr Bradford? Oh, Mr Adams.
So I guess it's worth noting that this is the second iteration of the motion that you put forward, and the first iteration was around amending the Standing Orders local law, which obviously couldn't be done in the form that you proposed it. However, I did respond to you to say that officers were happy to support the development of a policy. However, we wouldn't be able to do it to meet the time frame for the November OCM, and that it would be more likely that the February OCM would be the first opportunity for us to properly prepare something for Council to consider. So that was in the email I sent in response to your notice of motion.
Any further questions on this item, councillors? Councillor Cridland.
What is decorous language? Because I don't have a clue what it is.
I'm not sure there's any particular officer I can send that question to. Does anyone want to have a stab at that, or should we just go with a dictionary definition? I think we'll go with the dictionary definition, but thank you for the question. Any further questions on this item, councillors? No. Okay. We do, if anyone has any questions relating to item 15.1.1, which is a confidential item, this is the time that we would go behind closed doors, but if no one has any questions, we do? Okay, in that case, we're going to close the council chamber. For those of you in the gallery who attended this evening, thank you very much for your attendance. And for those who are listening, just wait for confirmation that we're back online. We are? Okay. So that was item 15.1.1. We've come back from confidential session back into the open chamber, but the only item remaining on the agenda is item 16, which is closure. So I declare this meeting closed at 6:49 p.m. Thank you all for your attendance and good night.